Question number 3. How can I become a preceptor? Well, as I have emphasized throughout the session, contact your local colleges of pharmacy because each college may have different processes and requirements. However, there are still some similarities across these colleges and processes. These typically involve several steps. The first step is for the pharmacist to fill out application forms. In this application form, we might ask about pharmacist's background, we might ask about pharmacy activities, how long the pharmacy has been in service, as well as whether students have opportunities for doing counseling services, interacting with healthcare professionals, whether they have opportunities to visit local community organizations that have close relationships with the pharmacies. In addition, we would also like to ask the pharmacist to provide documentations of trainings or sometimes certifications that their pharmacies has passed. Sometimes we may also involve site visits where the pharmacy faculty may visit the site prior to student arrival. This is just to make sure that there is enough space, there is enough activities going on in the pharmacy so that we can make sure students will receive a well-rounded experience at that specific site. After this process, each school of pharmacy might then have different matching processes. Sometimes we might ask the sites in advance to see how many slots they have for each student, how much they have for each colleges of pharmacy. And then we might be asking the students to fill out their preferences for different pharmacies and do that matching process. We would then notify the pharmacies which students they have been matched and when they should be expecting students to arrive. So after all of these routine communications, we still encourage these individual sites to have and maintain good relationships with the experiential office just in case that any emergencies or any difficult situations arise. So, what are the benefits of having good relationships with the experiential office? The first thing is that you can better understand course goals and college expectations. You might also better learn about what students have learned already in the college so that you can reinforce some of these learning goals and to make sure students have enough knowledge and skills. Also, you would better understand where to set up the expectation for your own site by better understanding what the college expects the students to complete. Experiential offices often provide preceptor training. Sometimes those are online modules, sometimes those are real-time or real-world workshops. So by having close relationships, you would better know when the next training opportunity comes up. As I have mentioned earlier, you could also obtain samples, templates of syllabus, evaluation criteria, activities, and different teaching tools to enhance your site experience. Again, we emphasize that having site-specific materials for these different documentations is important as different site has different learning outcomes and also different activities that they could conduct. Finally, by having close relationships with the experiential office and attending their retreats, you could also exchange experience with other preceptors and have discussions about difficult situations so that all of us can become better preceptors in the future. Question number 4. How can I precept students at different levels at the same time? This is often raised by community pharmacies where they may precept different pharmacy students from different schools of pharmacy. We know in Taiwan, some schools of pharmacies have a 4-year curriculum, some have 5-year curriculum, and we also have a 6-year curriculum at Taipei Medical University. So in case of these situations, say for example, the first one, if students come from different years in school practice with different learning outcomes, you might be able to consider designing activities where the more senior student or trainee can oversee or help, not necessarily oversee, this junior student or trainee. so that by teaching that junior student, the senior student or senior trainee can better understand the concepts or some of the hidden things that they may not have received or thought about earlier. Again, we emphasize that we want to make sure that these activities occur where laws and regulations permit. So when you need a pharmacist to supervise certain student pharmacist activities, make sure that pharmacist is also on site. Another example could be examples at the United States where they have residents as well as student pharmacists at the same time, at the same rotation. So in those experiences, sometimes the resident, because the resident is a pharmacist, it's by himself. So this pharmacist is capable of doing certain activities that a student pharmacist is not. So there are activities, say for example, maybe the student has never done a therapeutic drug monitoring program or never done those calculations in a real-world setting. So potentially the resident pharmacist could oversee some of those pharmacy students doing these activities. So while we don't have residencies in Taiwan, we also have PGY pharmacists. So even these pharmacists in training could become potential trainers, even though they're receiving training at the same time. Another situation is when students come from the same year in the school of practice, and typically these students would have the same learning outcomes. So because they have the same learning outcomes, I would suggest considering giving consistent assignments and activities so that students don't think that you are unfair to certain student and you could avoid some of those troubles. But still, you can encourage peer learning opportunities. Say, for example, you could ask the students to do a group project or to do a group assignment on certain disease states. Say, for example, some students could work on the epidemiology or the community needs or community situations for different disease states. Maybe another student could work on some of the activities that could be directed toward these needs for the community. So trying to separate out these activities and giving students some peer learning experience could be a good way in encouraging students to learn from each other. So even though they're at different levels, they could both have good experiential experiences. Again, I would like to use Dr. Brown's slide about good learning outcomes. Whenever you have a question in precepting, make sure you think about your good learning outcomes because the learning outcomes really direct how you should be teaching, how you should be assessing the student, and what kind of activities you should be providing the students. So as I mentioned earlier, if students at the same level at school come at the same time because they have just the same learning outcomes, we want to try to assign some similar activities for fairness sakes. But if students have different learning outcomes, then we can assign different methods, different activities for these learning experiences so they can be differentiated from each other.